Welcome to Boards, Beer, and BS, the Snomie.com podcast where snowboard pros, coaches, and local riders hang out, have a drink, and talk snowboarding. My name is Jedidiah Tan, snowboard coach and founder of Snomie.com. If you like hanging out with other snowboarders and talking about snowboarding, this is the podcast for you. So sit back and enjoy the podcast. Alright, hey guys, welcome to this episode of Boards, Beer, and BS. In today's episode, we're going to be talking about why you can't be a pro snowboarder. Or I guess the better term or the better title would be what separates a regular snowboarder or a regular person from a pro snowboarder. So let's talk about it in today's episode. As always, this episode is brought to you by the Snomie.com Snowboard Trick Secrets trick tip tutorials. So if you're interested in learning freestyle snowboarding, learning tricks, these are the most detailed snowboard trick tip videos on the planet. Okay, you won't find some crummy 2-3 minute YouTube tutorial on these tutorials. Okay, these are insanely detailed. Just to give you an example, our backside 180 tutorial, most tutorials might be 5 minutes long. Now, our backside 180 tutorial, we have 10 minutes just on prepping for the jump itself, and then another 10 minutes on actual spinning, another 10 minutes on the actual rotation. Basically, we really dive in depth and give you all the tools that you might need to succeed to really understand how a trick works before you do it. So if you're interested in them, go check them out at snomie.com. That's snomie.com/snowboard trick secrets, and you get started with the free tutorial videos there. Okay, so why can't you be a pro snowboarder? What separates a top pro snowboarder from everyone else? Well, firstly, let's talk about what I mean by pro snowboarder, because that's such a vague and broad term. I know there's a whole bunch of different types of pro snowboarders out there. There's free riding pros, there's lifestyle sponsored pros, there's a whole bunch of different types of pro snowboarders out there. I'm specifically talking in this episode about competitive pros, the kind of guys you see at X Games, right? So what separates them from everyone else? Now, as most of you guys know, I was on that path to be a competitive pro snowboarder at one point in time, and I stopped because I didn't want companies to basically control what I could or couldn't do. Basically, I just wanted freedom to make my own decisions, freedom to snowboard and do the type of snowboarding I wanted to do. But that's not what I'm going to be talking about today, because you guys already know about all that other stuff. What I want to talk about today is 5 things which I think separate the big pros, the guys who succeed at becoming competitive pro snowboarders, and the guys that don't. Okay, so the first one is love for the sport versus love for being an athlete. So what's the difference between love for the sport and love for being an athlete? Well, there's a whole bunch of other things that are involved once you step into the realms of being a professional athlete, right? You might love a sport in that it's what you eat, live, and breathe. You could do it all day, every day. You think about it, you know everything about the sport. And that's great, but that doesn't mean you actually enjoy the life of an athlete. You know, do you enjoy waking up at 5 a.m. in the morning to hit the gym before you go riding? Do you enjoy doing leg workouts at the end of the day after riding when your legs are already dead? Because you have to in order to be competitive as an athlete, right? There's a lot of pushing yourself to improve. You don't always get to do what you enjoy. Sometimes you have to push yourself in an area that isn't what you love doing. So just because you love being a sport, it's kind of like those guys that might love basketball or hockey or whatever else it is. They love the sport. You know, everyone's got someone who's a sports fanatic in some sport, right? And at the end of the day, they can love that sport, but it doesn't mean they'll actually like being a pro athlete, right? I mean, I watch a lot of basketball, I watch a lot of NBA, but that's a whole different world than the actual life of the athlete, where they travel every week pretty much from city to city. They train, they have strict diets, they don't really have much of a social life during the regular season. There's a whole bunch of other things that are involved with being an athlete that people may not necessarily enjoy. You know, I get a lot of emails from young guys usually who email me and say, you know what, I'm I'm 17, I'm 18, I need to figure out what I need to do. What career I want. Should I go to college? Should I do this? And sometimes the justification for like considering being a professional athlete in some sport is that, oh no, I really love this sport. When I think back about my life and all the things that I love, this one stands out, right? But there's a big difference between loving that sport as a spectator and being in that sport as an athlete. So I think that's one area that a lot of people don't consider when they think, oh, I could do that. And in reality, no, you probably couldn't, or you probably, not that you couldn't, but you probably wouldn't want to be the pro athlete. It's glamorous looking at the top 1% of athletes who get, all that money and all that fame and all that jazz. But you have to remember that that's the top 1%. There's a 99% out there who are not earning that money. They're not earning that fame, but they still have to put in the day-to-day work to stay in that competitive area as an athlete. And that's what you don't see. So that's one of the factors I think that really separates a pro snowboarder from, the average Joe, is that they love being an athlete. The ones that succeed anyway, they love improving themselves. And this leads to my second point, which is pro snowboarders and pro athletes in general have this inner competitive drive to be the best. And it's just this weird thing. I mean, you see it in every sport. The most notable that most people tend to know is tennis. You see guys when they're playing tennis at whatever Wimbledon, and they screw up, they mess up something, and they throw the racket on the ground. Now, most people look at this and think, oh man, he's such a bad sport and whatever, and that may be true. But what drives them to be frustrated isn't that they're frustrated at the opponent or other people. They're usually frustrated at themselves. All highly competitive people with this competitive drive, they just want to be able to sit down at the end of the day and know that, hey, I did my best. I did the best that I know I could possibly do at that time. And you will find it in a lot of athletes in that they don't really care if they lose, but rather they care more if they did what they thought was possible for them to do, right? So even if they lose, as long as they feel like they did the best that they could have done in that situation, then most of them are, pretty content with that. And it's just this inner competitive drive to be the best that drives them to improve, drives athletes, drives pro snowboarders to just be better than the average Joe when it comes to that sport. When the average Joe goes home because, they might be a little bit tired, or they might, have other priorities, the person that makes it as that pro athlete, as that pro snowboarder, they're not going home. Now, they're going to do everything in their power they can to reach that goal in their mind, because that's how competitive they are. And at the end of the day, most professional athletes, at least the ones that make it, are more competitive with themselves than anyone else. Okay, it's themselves they're always competing. They want to beat themselves. They want to improve themselves. And that's another point which I think is really important, which is self-improvement. Okay, out of all the professional athletes that I've met, out of I don't know, pretty much every single one of them, the ones that have been successful, who have made it, they are almost obsessive about self-improvement. They can't help themselves. They always have something they're working on, something that they're improving, because that's just how they function. And when that self-improvement gets applied to being an athlete, that's what really makes them stand out from the crowd. Because when you think about it, the guys who actually make it as a pro athletes, they are already the 1% out of the 99 other percent, that have been striving, have been trying to get to that goal. And the ones that make it, they're usually fanatical. There's weird things that stick out about them, and self-improvement is one of them. So while the average Joe goes up onto the ski hill and just has a fun day, the person that is that future up-and-coming pro snowboarder, that competitive drive inside of them, is telling them, today I'm going to do this 180. I'm going to do it this way, and it's going to be perfect, right? And sometimes I try to explain to people like how the mentality is, because I'm a little bit like this as well. I think all highly competitive people are like this, in that they strive for perfection in whatever it is they're trying to do. Okay, and the best example I can give for myself is that, look, when I was on that path to becoming a competitive pro snowboarder, there were days when I would go on the hill and I would only do 180s all day for a week. And that was all I would do. I'd do the exact same trick over and over and over again. And the reason was because it hadn't hit that level where I thought, okay, this is exactly what I'm trying to do. And I'm going to keep improving this until I get this 100% perfect. And that's the thing, right? There's no such thing as perfection in most sports. Everything can always be improved. But in your head, in a pro athlete's head, there's always that idea of this is what the ideal is, and I need to meet that standard, right? So even if, let's say you do a backside 180 off a jump 99 times, and 99 times out of 100, it was almost perfect. So for the average Joe just watching them do that trick, they would say, that guy's got that trick down. It's perfect. But in the pro athlete's head, okay, they're thinking, oh man, my rotation was, 5% off here, or my hand was in slightly the wrong position. It wasn't quite right there, or my pop off the jump was little bit unstable. And there's all these little things that you might not see from just watching the trick that can be improved, because, as I said, everything can always be improved. There's no such thing as perfection in pretty much any sport. So that's kind of the mentality that most pro snowboarders have. It's this crazy self-improvement that they're constantly pushing themselves for that perfection that can never be achieved, right? And that's just the mentality. They know. I mean, I knew when I was going crazy trying to do backside 180s and getting them 99% of the way right, but still not being happy with them. I know that's crazy, right? I know that you're never going to get that perfect, but that's kind of the drive you have when you're highly competitive and you want to improve one aspect of yourself in that sport. So yeah, that's just the mindset, okay? And another thing that separates pro snowboarders from the average Joe is that they have a crazy sense of self-belief. And sometimes it's true and sometimes it's not. So if you've seen any interviews with almost any pro athlete in most sports. So for me, like I said, I like to watch basketball. I watch NBA, and they can interview, D-list players, role players, guys who aren't the superstars. And a lot of them, to get to that stage, they already have that self-belief that, no, I can be the best. I can compete with LeBron James. I can compete with Michael Jordan, right? And it's not until they get stomped by them that they take a step back. But even after they get destroyed by the LeBron Jameses of the world, they'll still have this belief in their head that, I can still train, I can improve, I can get there, I can hit that stage, right? And it's this crazy self-belief that drives a lot of what makes top pro athletes good. And it's what drives a pro snowboarder to do 180s all day, every day for a week. It's what drives them to wake up at 5 a.m. in the morning to go to the gym, to work out, to do a leg workout after riding powder all day, to basically to go that extra mile. It's that crazy sense of self-belief that they can make it into that 0.1% of top pros that actually get to make a living doing that sport. And I mean, at the end of the day, you kind of have to have that crazy sense of self-belief, because if you look at the statistics, a very small percentage of up-and-coming pro athletes will ever make it into the limelight, will ever make it into that 1% where they can actually be successful in that sport. So to go on that crazy journey, they need all those things. They need to love being an athlete. They need to have that inner competitive drive. They need to be obsessive about self-improvement. And they need to have that crazy sense of self-belief that they can do anything. Right? I mean, they are the top 1%. A pro athlete, a pro snowboarder, they're in that top 1% of people who have been able to convert their dream into reality. For every 1% that succeeds, 99% of people fail. So I'm just trying to give you a sense of, look, these are the things that separate the people that make it and the people that don't. And I guess the last one that I'd really put there is that there's a love for a sport that defies logic with most people who are these professional athletes that actually make it. And in snowboarding, you can see the ones that don't have this love for the sport, the ones that have been pushed up by their parents, by other people to do all the other things, okay? So push them to be an athlete, push them to be competitive, push them to self-improve all the time, push them to have that crazy self-belief. If they're pushed there without their own choice, they burn out. You see it constantly all the time. You see up-and-coming little pro athletes, pro snowboarders especially, who have been pushed there by their parents, right? And then they train and they train and they train, and then they make it. Eventually they make it. But then they are an adult, and suddenly what progress you saw, so when they were teenagers, they might have progress at 1,000,000 miles a day. They just, every day they were making new grounds and having this insane level of improvement. But then they hit an adult and they get to make their own choices, and suddenly all that progression vanishes. Suddenly they just coast. And the reason is because they're burnt out. They've spent all the time before doing something that they didn't really love. They were just kind of pushed to do it. And the ones that succeed, the ones that can keep going beyond just that point where someone else is pushing them, is the ones that just love the sport. They have this fanatical love for not only the sport, but for doing the sport, right? So not just as a spectator, but for as an actual competitor in the sport. They love it to the point where even if no one was pushing them, they would still do it, right? Even if they weren't earning that money, they'd still do it. So now this doesn't apply to every single competitive pro, obviously, but the ones that hit that top 1%, the ones that make it, they've got that love for the sport. It's kind of crazy, right? It's kind of crazy to think that you can wake up every day and do the exact same thing and not get bored. Because at the end of the day, it is very repetitive, right? When you're in this regime, you kind of wake up, you do your gym routine or whatever, then you go snowboard, you work on your set tricks, you kind of cast away your social life and a lot of other things that you can do when you're on that competitive level, because that's the kind of training that's required nowadays to compete. And at the end of the day, you kind of have to live it if you want to continue doing it long term. Otherwise, you just burn out. You become that 18-year-old pro who was pushed there by their parents, and then finally they make their own choices and they choose to just not do that anymore. They're done. So yeah, I hope this sheds some light on, why you can't be a pro snowboarder, or rather what separates a pro snowboarder from the average Joe. I still believe that most people can, if you really, really, really wanted to be a pro and you were able to push yourself to do all these things, I think most people can at least hit the minimum of what's required to be a pro snowboarder. But whether you enjoy it, whether this would be a choice that you would want to make, that's a whole different ballgame. So these are the 5 things that separate a top pro from everyone else. This is the mindset difference that a top pro has. And this is why you notice that a lot of these things that I mentioned are mental things. It's why any top athlete, any high-level competitor will tell you the game is 90% mental, right? That's what separates everyone else. The physical things almost anyone can do, they can improve on, they can work on. The physical aspects are the simple parts. They can be tiring, like going to the gym or hiking a snowboard half pipe over and over again. That can be tiring physically, but they're very basic at the end of the day. They're things that, you just do this, this, and this, and you will see that improvement. But for all the other things, for love being an athlete, for having that inner competitive drive to just push yourself all the time, for self-improvement, that crazy sense of self-belief, that love for the sport that pushes them to constantly do all those other things, that's all mental game, right? And it's why mental is such a big aspect as far as the guys that succeed and the guys that don't. All right, so I hope you guys enjoyed this podcast. I know I've talked about what separates pro snowboarders from regular Joes before, but I've never really talked in depth, in detail about it like I did today. So I hope you guys enjoyed this podcast. I'll see you guys in the next episode. And as always, remember, this podcast is brought to you by the Snomie.com Snowboard Trick Secrets program. So if you're interested in getting started in freestyle snowboarding and getting the most detailed snowboard trick tip tutorial videos on the planet, go to snomie.com/snowboard trick secrets and you can get started with the 4 free videos there. All right, take care, and I'll see you guys in the next podcast.